started. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining today. We are talking about a new and significantly growing problem. Let me actually share my slides here 1 second. I actually spoke with one of my former colleagues over at the analyst firm Gartner yesterday about this challenge and topic about how do we kind of deal with AI in our third parties. I actually created this presentation for an event I did out in Denver, Colorado in the US a little while ago. And it's a variation of a deck that I've done a whole bunch of times around how to manage third-party risk and how to deal with the challenges and struggles that we all face. And of course, the event leader came back to me and said, so what about AI? So I said, okay. So I changed the title, I changed the abstract, I added a couple of little blurbs in there, but it's really the presentation that I've been giving for a while on this. And I'll just kind of say one last thing before I jump into the slides. I see a lot of talk on LinkedIn about the fact that everybody is worried that they don't have an AI governance program or an AI risk management program. And that's a problem. But I also feel like if we are doing a good job on risk management, we should be able to adapt and adopt that for any technology, AI being one of them. And I recognize AI has some interesting, unique qualities to it that I'll talk about. But that's really where this presentation came from. And I'll leave time at the end for questions. Okay, so what I will tell you for sure is the bad actors are coming after you, and I'll give everyone the benefit of the doubt and say you may be perfect at defending yourself. You're not, but I'm going to cut you a little bit of slack. But what I can tell you is your third parties, your vendors, your suppliers, they're probably not doing as good a job as we would like them to do. Maybe they're small providers or small elements of your supply chain, and they don't have a lot of dedicated resources to apply to cybersecurity. Maybe they are running into these challenges where they don't understand the connection between technology and actual supply chain. And this is a topic that I talk about regularly. I always say that bad actors, hackers, whatever you want to call them, they're like water. They take the easiest route possible. And if the easiest way to get into you, to impact you, to steal your data, to shut down your operations, and they can do it through your partners, they're going to do that. So that's really what we want to think about today. A little bit about me. My title is Senior Vice President, Cyber Risk Strategist at Black Kite. It's kind of a ridiculous title that we made up, but really what I do is I think about stuff and then I have the opportunity to talk to people like you about the stuff that I think about. I speak with a lot of clients. I basically spend probably 6 hours a day on the phone talking both to CISOs, risk leaders. I also talk to CEOs, CFOs, COOs. So I talk to a lot of people across the organization, and I talk to a lot of rank and file. So people that are doing the work that, kind of rolling up their sleeves. And I bring all that stuff together and I turn it into, here are the things that people are doing that works. Here are the things that people are doing that don't. Let's talk about how you can apply that within your organization. I have been in my current role at Black Kite for 4 years. Before that, I spent 15 years at Gartner as an analyst, where I led, among other things, the third-party cyber risk research. I spent a dozen years as a consultant, and in and around there, I spent 10 years doing strategic advisory. I know enough about artificial intelligence to be dangerous and to be very, very afraid. I say a bit afraid, and then Moltbot came out, or Clawbot rather, and I'm like super scared. Now, again, I work for Black Kite. If anyone's interested in learning more about us, please feel free to connect to me on LinkedIn. I mean, you should connect to me on LinkedIn anyway. So to kind of start this off, I think it's helpful to sort of show the complexity of what we are dealing with here. In the old days, third-party risk, vendor risk, supply chain risk was quite simple. If legal was okay with the contract and gave it a thumbs up, and finance said, yeah, their finances look like they're going to be in existence at least as long as the length of the contract, we're good. And they signed up. It is much, much more complicated now. One of the challenges we have is people use different terms. So we hear third-party risk, vendor risk, supply chain risk. For the perspective of what we're going to talk about today, the cyber piece, there is no difference between those three. We call that ecosystem risk, and that is the risk you take on because of people you do business with. But we can see here that all these risks are now broken up into technical, business. We have legal, regulatory, compliance. We have all of these different things that we need to look at. And for some of us on the technology side, on the cyber side, we don't really know these things. We don't have a lot of visibility. We don't have a lot of understanding, and probably don't need to, other than knowing that they exist and they're part of a larger problem. There are some strategic challenges and opportunities in here. This was actually a slide that I put together for our company kickoff last year, and it still resonates. The first one is this ownership problem. And yes, all of my images are AI created, so I recognize that some people in here have extra fingers. But who owns this problem? And we have salespeople at Black Kite. We go into an opportunity in a bank with 10 billion euros, dollars, pounds, whatever, under management. And they say, oh yeah, the CISO owns cyber in third-party risk. And then we go into a company just like that, and they say, no, procurement owns that. And then we go into another company, they say, no, legal owns that. So we have this ownership problem. It's really a lot of this risk hot potato. The second sort of challenge and trend is around the fact that everybody's very focused on the data. And don't get me wrong, we got to protect the data. But what people need to start doing, and we're starting to see a shift here, is focusing more on business resilience. And the way I define resilience is quite simple. How do we keep our business at a minimum level of viability no matter what happens? Okay. Then the third one here is about risk accountability. So this is who's ultimately held accountable if we say, yes, you know what, we're going to do business with that vendor, even though the security team told us they're not doing a good job on cyber, right? So who's ultimately accountable for that? And then we have this challenge around global compliance. I saw a statistic a number of years ago, and it's probably gotten worse, that the average mid-sized financial services firm has 70,000 compliance requirements. Now, that's not 70,000 rules, but every framework they had has a couple, 100, and they're a local, they're a global, they're a regional, they're a country. We have compliance from all of these different oversight entities. We have contractual compliance, et cetera. And then there's this misperception in the market that this is a problem that actually cannot be solved. And in fact, it absolutely can. We have tons of customers who have solved this. They know where this stuff sits. They are proactive about managing cyber risk within their supply chains. And we hear feedback that they're saving a ton of money on things like onboarding. They are able to get ahead of the curve. They have better relationships with their vendors because instead of sending a 500-question questionnaire, they're sending 30 questions. So that's really where we need to get to. This is a solvable problem. And as if all of that complexity is not enough, we have this huge AI issue, right? Is AI benevolent? Is it dangerous? I think it's both. This slide, again, was put together. If I were to put together this slide again fresh, I would probably have 20 new vendors to throw in here. All of these are probably within your organization at some point. It's very, very difficult to control them. They are embedded in a lot of stuff that we do. And one of the big challenges is our vendors, our suppliers are using these things, and they're not necessarily telling us, and they might not really even know. And I think that's the problem, is we are subject to the risk, and I'm going to talk about this in a couple minutes, but we have this risk because of things we don't even know about, things that we don't see. We have this concept at Black Kite called the silent breach, which is the breach that happens to you because, oh my gosh, I had no idea I was even dealing with that vendor and they just got breached. They have my data. People are now inside my network. So that's the kind of thing that we need to start thinking about. Everybody in AI risk is talking about data leakage, and certainly that is a problem. You don't want your data getting out there. You don't want your PII, your financial data. You don't want the data of your customers that you've collected out there. And that is definitely something we need to think about. In my opinion, I don't really think it's even the worst one. The data is already out there. People are getting breached. If you think their privacy is a thing, we should probably have a separate follow-up conversation. Privacy, the data is out there. Everybody in the world's data has been compromised multiple times. It is what it is at this point now. But some of the things that people are not really paying enough attention to are things like biased and unexplained decisions. There was something circulating around on LinkedIn last week. I don't know if it's true. It might be an apocryphal story, but I guarantee this is happening somewhere. And the story goes something like this. We just found out after 6 months of using AI to feed us data that we use to make decisions, turns out the data is wrong. The AI has been hallucinating. And as a result of that, that the VP of sales reallocated their territories based on fake data. They were presenting data points to the board of directors, the people who are ultimately responsible for governing the organization's success, fake data. So having that is a huge problem. And until we figure out how to fix the non-determinate challenge around AI, which is true. So I hope all of you know that AI is non-deterministic for the most part. If you feed it the same data and you ask it the same question, you might not get the same answers. We also have a lot of biases in these things. I use AI to create a lot of images, and I have no problem admitting that. But one of the things that I found was if I went out and I tell any of them do this, I want a group of people. You know what it always gives me? Middle-aged white men. I have to explicitly say I want a diverse group of people. I want diversity in age, race, and gender. I have to explicitly tell it to do that. There was an article that came out last week talking about the fact that they looked at a bunch of data from, I think they looked at ChatGPT and Gemini, but all the models have the same challenge. And they found a bunch of these sort of preconceived notions about certain people who live in certain areas of the United States have certain characteristics to them. And this is bias in the data, therefore there's bias at outputs, and we don't ask enough questions. So we need to start thinking about all those things. We're starting to see more AI-driven cyber supply chain attacks. I was actually talking to somebody yesterday, and he said, well, we're seeing a lot of fraud in supply chain, meaning somebody is showing up with a fake truck, with a fake bill, a fake invoice saying, hey, I'm here to pick up the product. They get in the truck, they drive away, and 45 minutes later, you know who shows up? The real truck. And you say, well, that's not a cyber thing, but it is. Because those bad actors, they need to know when the product is being shipped, and they need to beat the legit truck there by half an hour. They don't want to show up too early because it won't be ready. And if they show up too late, this stuff is gone already. So we're seeing more and more of that. We also are seeing a lot of very industry-specific challenges because every industry has vendors on which they rely who are only in that vendor. So those companies tend to be smaller. They're not actually in a position where they can devote a ton of effort and exercise a big cybersecurity program, so they're starting to go there. We have these legal and accountability problems. Ultimately, if you as an organization collect data, you ultimately are responsible and accountable for what happened to that data, and nobody in the courts is going to be okay with, hey, well, it wasn't us, it was the supplier. No, nobody's interested in that, especially if you work for bigger organizations, because you're going to end up on the front page of the paper. And I'll give you an example there. This is an old one, but it's still true. So Target had a big breach. They lost a ton of data. And everybody says, oh, Target. They were on the front page of the paper. But Target actually got breached through a third party, which was an HVAC vendor. So a vendor that did air conditioning, ventilation, and heating systems. And if you ask people, they don't know the name of that company. I do because we do research in this, but it's a company called Fazio Mechanical. Nobody ever heard of them. And I don't really think Target was going to be able to go into court and say, well, it wasn't us, it was Fazio. So there's a challenge there. And then we're also seeing, as a result of a lot of uptick in AI governance, how do we govern this? How do we put that back into our contracts and that? And then we have this model drift and vendor dependency. One of the things that we're starting to see, especially for smaller organizations that don't have a ton of resources, they're investing a lot of time and energy building a business process around an AI model. And that's okay. Well, what happens when that AI model gets bought, right? We just saw actually the guy that created Claude just got hired by OpenAI. Well, what if you made an investment in Claude as a platform and you paid them money and then they got bought by this big giant behemoth? You have no idea what your thing is. And as we get these things more and more embedded, it becomes more and more challenging to actually pull out of them. So, that's a challenge. Our PR firm at Black Kite, every year, they make me do these predictions. And one of the predictions I put out this year was I think 50% of AI vendors are going to be out of business by the end of the year, most of which they're going to be bought by the bigger companies. So you have this embedded in your organization. So, data leakage is certainly a problem. We need to talk about that. But I think ultimately there are these other risks that we need to pay more attention to as well. So a couple of sort of historical and contextual things. AI is not a new thing. The concept of AI as an actual discipline, what came out in the 1950s, specifically at the Dartmouth Conference in 1956. So Dartmouth is a university in the US, an Ivy League, very high-end school. But really, the thoughts behind it go back even further than that to Charles Babbage, who created the concept of a difference engine. And what Charles Babbage said was, we could build a machine that could replicate every mathematical calculation. And in theory, that is true. The machines get increasingly complicated. But then Ada Lovelace, who was unique for a variety of reasons, she was a brilliant woman. She was the daughter of Lord Byron, the British poet. But she studied in mathematics when women didn't study at all, and certainly didn't study in mathematics. But you can see this AI is not new, but because of the uptick in generative AI, and ChatGPT in particular kind of started the ball rolling there, people are hearing about it who didn't know about it before. And then let's add, AI is much more than generative AI. There are these levels of AI. Right now, we are really just in artificial narrow intelligence. These GPTs are good at certain things. The next step is AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, and that's sort of been the holy grail for a while. They keep moving the bar. But then the third one is really this artificial superintelligence. And this is like the Star Wars and the Star Trek, where you can stand anywhere and ask a question, and you have this artificial intelligence that's going to help you, make a difference or make a decision. What's interesting about artificial superintelligence, it's at the core of a lot of science fiction, some of which is quite scary. I actually just reread one of my favorite sci-fi books called Steel Beach by John Varley. And I won't ruin it, but there's an interesting situation with the artificial intelligence that runs human society on the moon. I also just started rereading a series that I love called the Culture series, where the culture is a post-scarcity society, so everybody has everything they want, and it is entirely run by these huge artificial intelligences. So different levels, we have all these different kind of types. So we have machines that are reactive, we have limited memory. So that's really where we are now. Theory of mind, and I think this one is a little bit farther out. This is where computers can actually replicate the way humans think, as opposed to guessing based on mathematical models. And then we have self-aware AI, and that's the one that scares me. And then we have all these subfields. There's ML, machine learning, deep learning, NLP, vision, robotics, expert systems, reinforcement learning. All of these are different kind of subfields. And if you're interested in robotics, take a look at Boston Robotics, Boston Scientific. They are the ones, they have videos. 5-6 years ago, their robots were connected by wire and they were very ungainly, and now they have them running parkour courses. They really have gone a really, really far way toward, having robots that can actually do a lot of things for us. So here are the three ways that AI impacts cybersecurity. So the first one is your businesses and all of your vendors and your partners, they're using AI to be more efficient, to be more effective, to make better decisions, to provide you better data. And we talked about the hallucination problem. The challenge here is a lot of the sort of people in the business don't know how AI is being used. They don't know why. They're not necessarily sharing it. I actually met a deputy chief information security officer at an event a few months ago, and she told me that their CEO had just put out a mandate, all AI all the time in every critical business system in the next 90 days. And you know who they didn't talk to about? They didn't talk to IT, and they didn't talk to the cybersecurity team. So this is a business who's going to be deploying AI just because. And I always tell people, don't throw AI at a problem just because you can. The second area is the defenders. So all of you are trying to leverage AI to keep all the bad actors at bay. Every vendor says they use it, and they are using it to a certain extent, but you always have to be mindful of how they're using it and why. And then, of course, the bad actors, they're using all the tools we have, and then a bunch of stuff I wouldn't even touch. They're using any tools they can get to win. And what we're seeing there is not necessarily anything new from them, but they're doing all the same old stuff much, much faster. There are a ton of AI-enabled penetration testing tools, so tools that are basically tasked with breaking into your stuff. And we've seen them turn loose in lab environments primarily at this point, but they are able to find new vulnerabilities, compromise those systems, and gain root access, which is ultimately the God of God account that can do anything in a system, steal data, change process, et cetera. And they're able to do this in an hour, hour and a half. A good attacker who's doing it manually might take days or weeks to be able to do that. So there's this great acceleration. So here are the three sort of contextual things that you all need to be mindful of. One of the things that we think is really, really important is this kind of hierarchy of data. I always talk about the fact that data is ones and zeros. Information is what happens to the ones and zeros when you organize it, when you translate it, when you gather it together and compile it in different places. But above that even is intelligence. So this is when you take that information and you apply business context. So I'll give you an example within the third-party risk space. So I know based on data that I have gathered that you have open ports in your firewall. Okay, so that's a data point. But information is, well, you have open ports in your firewall that are not typically or commonly left open. They appear to connect back into an application, and it looks like that application has PII in it, so privacy data. So that's information. Intelligence now says, well, you have that port open to this system, but that system is not really business critical for me. None of my data is in there, so I don't really care. And therefore, as long as you do the bare minimum, I'm okay. So we have that hierarchy where we go from data to information to intelligence. And this is, the way at Black Kite, the way we refer to ourselves is we are third-party risk intelligence. So we're gathering all of this data, we contextualize it, and then through a ton of data and a lot of algorithmic stuff that we've deployed, some of it is AI-based because you have no choice these days, we actually help our customers make better decisions about whether they're willing to accept, mitigate, or transfer risk of a particular partner. And we actually do this in real time, so it's not just a point-in-time snapshot. But whenever anyone presents you with data, you want to start asking contextual questions. So what does that mean for me? That sounds bad, but is it actually bad for me? And we have to start having those conversations and engaging with our business stakeholders, because ultimately they are the ones that should be responsible for these decisions. One of the areas, and I talked about a misperception in the market, and this is one of the things we talk about, a lot of people are very big on scoring, and our competitors do this, and we have scores as well, but not all scores are created equal. What we need to be able to do is create this transparency so that we can communicate when we talk to our business executives why we think the things we think. So if you had to bring a score to your executives, which one would you prefer? The black box that you don't understand? Or would you prefer the one that you can dig in deep and understand? So here's why this is. And by the way, we don't care about that particular data element. So you can actually then make modifications. And we're very, very proud of that open model. And that is really where we need to go. We need to stop with all of this black box scoring, because what we need to move away from is, I got 2 thumbs and I say so. We need to be able to dig in deep and understand. So which of these kinds of things do you feel comfortable bringing to your executives? Now, just so everyone out there is aware, there are some screenshots from the Black Kite platform in here. I promise I'm not trying to sell you anything. If anyone's interested, please feel free to reach out to me. But I'm just really using them for illustrative purposes, because I think it's helpful to get people to understand what some of the things are that are out there. I talked a little bit about context when I talked about data to information to intelligence, and this is the kind of stuff that we're talking about. The score, the rating without outside in view is definitely helpful, at least to kind of give you a level set. But we need to start looking at other things like, how likely is it that ransomware is going to become a problem in your environment? I'm going to share a story with you in a couple minutes about that exact example and how it manifested itself in someone that I know. Um, we need to be able to look at the financial element. So we need to be able to go to your business executives and say, this vendor, because of things they are not doing or doing the way we don't want them to, they are subjecting to us to $1 million worth of risk, 1 million euros, 1 million pounds, 1 billion rupees, whatever. That makes it easier for them to make decisions, because what you can have is, if we don't fix this or we don't deal with this, something really bad's going to happen. Well, when? Pretty soon. How bad? It's going to be pretty bad. No one can make decisions based on that. What you can and want to be able to do is go to them and say, this vendor, they're not doing a good job protecting themselves against ransomware. If they get hit with ransomware, they're going to be down 2 weeks, and that's going to cost us this much money. What do you want to do about that? Okay. And then we have this concept called focus tags, which we have a ton of data that we gather. We're one of the 5 biggest data stores in Google's cloud, and that data is updated on average twice a month. So it's very big data and very fresh. What that means is, when a new movie comes out, or a new 0-day or a new CVE E10 comes out, we can identify where that sits in that larger ecosystem in real time. We can then feed that back into continuous monitoring, continuous risk assessment, continuous threat evaluation, threat intelligence, et cetera. And it makes the interaction with between companies and their vendors much, much smoother. And then, of course, compliance is always a driver. For us, as an example, out of the box, we have 16 different frameworks we can benchmark against, but we can also customize. You could say, you want people to do these 50 controls? Okay, we can benchmark against that. And it gives you a really good idea to feed back into your legal and compliance teams about what you should be looking at within your environment. And then I talked on the previous slide a little bit about the financial assessment. I always talk about that mapping money to money, because what you can't have is, we need $5 million. Well, what if we don't give you the $5 million? Something bad's going to happen. When you do that, you're undermining your sort of reputation and the trust. Because I can tell you, when marketing goes to the CFO and says, I need money, I need $5 million, the CFO says, what do I get for that? Well, you give me $5 million, I'll give you $35 million worth of pipeline. When you go to sales says, well, I can hire 6 salespeople with a $500,000 quota, and that gets me back $6 million on your $5 million investment, right? We need to be able to do that on the cyber side. We have an implementation of a cyber risk quantification model called OpenFair. There are other ones out there. FAIR is actually one of the more accepted ones. There is some overhead to building this. We've actually built a way to deploy it without a lot of overhead. And you can go in and you can answer a couple of questions about a vendor and say, this vendor is much riskier for me than others. And that way, it enables you to make a better business decision. 2 vendors may stink. They may be at a C. They may have a ransomware susceptibility of above a 0.8, and I'll talk about what that means in a couple of minutes. But one of them doesn't have any of our data, or one of them is not deemed critically important. So we don't really need to pay as much attention there. And then we can also do risk-based scenario modeling. Say, what if the vendor does this? And then you can go to the vendor and say, hey, if you do this, we're good. Right now, we're not. So being able to put money to that, mapping the money to money, is really, really valuable. Most people, when we ask them how they're doing third-party risk management, they're doing it by questionnaires. We don't think questionnaires are ever going to go away. We would like them to be able to. But what we have found is that if you can gather a ton of data, you got a SOC 2, send it to us. You have an assessment report, send it to us. You have 200 pages in policy, send it to us. We can run it through a system. And then instead of giving you 500 questions, we can come back and say, we want 25 questions. And it much, much easier. I always say our job is to make our customers' jobs easier, but part of the way we do that is by making their vendors' jobs easier. And we continually hear that this ease and lack of friction is really, really strong. And then we also have a capability called the bridge, where it enables you to communicate directly with the security teams on your vendor side and vice versa, as opposed to having to go up to the salesperson, across, and then down. So I talked about ransomware. We know ransomware is a big problem. In theory, what people say is you can't actually forecast ransomware, but we actually believe that you can. What we've done is we've identified 35 controls that are very, very connected back to ransomware. We know that if you implement these controls at a certain level, things like multi-factor authentication, things like data encryption, things like using DMARC in your email, domain validation, et cetera, you are much more likely to be able to fend off a ransomware attack and recover. So as I said, we have a ridiculous amount of data. And what we did is we have found that if your RSI is above a 0.8, you are 96 times more likely to have experienced a ransomware attack than those with an RSI below 0.2. That is significant. And we have the data to back it up. Now, I'll tell you a little story about ransomware in your supply chain. So there is, or rather, there was a company called K&P Logistics. They are also known as the Knights of the Old. They are located in the UK. 2 years ago, they had a ransomware incident. They had to shut down their whole business. They were out of business in 90 days. They were a 156-year-old family business, and they were out of business. They went into receivership. They had 400 employees. Excuse me. Sorry about that. All of whom lost their jobs. And you say, well, that's terrible for them. But you know who it's really terrible for? Anybody waiting for one of their trucks to show up with raw material, or anybody waiting for one of their trucks to show up to ship it to a store. I told that story in our customer advisory board, and one of my customers who works for a large global manufacturer put her hand up and said, yeah, that ransomware incident cost my company $5 million. That is the financial impact. And they will also just share one thing. This one isn't supply chain related, but last year, Jaguar Land Rover, big automotive manufacturer in the UK, got hit with ransomware. They had a 1.1% impact on the GDP, the gross domestic product for the UK, one of the 5 biggest economies in the world. You want to talk about the financial impact of ransomware on the GDP of a country? That is the kind of stuff that we are dealing with. Okay, so I actually realized I didn't have a double there. One of the things we're hearing from a lot of our customers as well is, all right, so we're doing a good job managing our third parties. What about fourth parties? What about fifth parties? What about things like concentration risk, meaning I have a lot of my data in one particular platform, or my vendors are all using Google Cloud, or my vendors are all using Microsoft Cloud, or whatever. What if they go down? So looking at all that data, looking at all the connectivity gives you a really, really powerful story to tell. And the other one is this concept of cascading risk, which is what if your nth party, so your fifth party, has a breach? What does that mean for you? And the story that I use all the time there's a company called 7 Rooms. They are a CRM, a customer relationship management platform in the hospitality industry. They had a breach about 2 years ago. And if you stayed in a couple of hotel chains or went to a couple of restaurants, your data was in that breach. And you say, well, I didn't agree to give them my data. And that's right, you didn't. But here's the part where it got even crazier. They didn't really have a breach. They had a third-party data transfer agent that had a breach that cascaded to them. And then these hotel chains had to then go to their customers and say, hey, by the way, your data that you gave us, that you trusted us with because we are a trusted hotel, yeah, that data got breached. So those are the kinds of things that we need to be able to look at. We can start, and we can do it visually. We can start to show how the impact is. And because we have data on so many companies, we can also help you sort of preempt and say, hey, we have a lot of eggs in this one basket here. We should probably think about how we can monitor that and manage that. One of the challenges that we run into, and we're starting to see more sort of synergies here, but third-party cyber risk management is definitely part of corporate risk and governance, right? It fits in there. It fits under the VRM. It fits under GRC, governance, risk management, and compliance. But we're also starting to hear from a lot of our folks is that it also fits into security operations. Security operations teams are starting to look more at the extended ecosystem. So it's not just about them, it's about their vendors and their partners. So what we think is that there's got to be a set of solutions that actually bring all of those things together. And that's really, really challenging and difficult. The data is out there, but we're selling to different teams. We're having different conversations, but we think this is the future, which is being able to do assessments in any time, in real time, as well as doing continuous monitoring. That benefits people on the risk side as well as on the operations side. So taking this intelligence first approach, so going back to what I talked about earlier about intelligence as sort of the capstone to data and information, you can automate your compliance. So how fast can we do it? And what we see is a lot of organizations in our customer base that are able to onboard vendors much, much more quickly, days versus weeks versus months. Being able to scale remediation, so being more efficient and being able to monitor what we are doing in real time or near real time. Understand the actual risk, the business impact, and being able to prioritize, and then being able to be proactive. One of the things we're working on now is the concept of moving away from observational third-party risk management. We've spent so much time saying this is bad, this is a problem, and then we throw it over the fence. So what we think has to happen is we need to move to, okay, here's what we see, and here are the things that should be done. How can we help you make sure that those things are done? So being able to do that. When we talk about what CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers, and their teams need to do to secure AI in the supply chain is they need to look at the data side. And I talked about data as not as important. It is, it's just we're starting to see a shift away. But being able to understand data protection so that we can address these AI-specific threats without impeding development because your business is doing it. Segregate data and systems so that we can do development without compromise, and make models a really, really important priority when you are looking at this. And now we're just going to talk a little bit for the last couple of minutes about areas where you as defenders can actually leverage AI. So threat and anomaly detection, because that's what the bad actors are doing. Breach and attack simulation, so automate internal and external pen testing. Looking at orchestration, so that's where we can bring the GRC and the security operations together. Discovering assets, and we'll make sure these slides get shared out to all of the attendees. We also need to understand what the bad actors are doing. So some of the things they're doing is they're testing malware success against AI-based defenses. They have access to all the tools we use to defend. They're learning how to poison AI with inaccurate data. And for a long time, what we heard was that you have to insert a lot of data to poison it, but it turns out you don't really, and there are techniques that the bad actors are using to actually poison the data pool, make different decisions with a fairly small amount. They're also mapping the way the models think. More specifically, we're seeing a huge uptick in deepfake, in fraud. They're building better malware. They're doing it much faster. They're able to create launch and stealth attacks because they know how the machines are going to respond. They know if we push here, here's the response we get back. If we push 2 times in a row, we're going to get 3 times the response. So why don't we push slower and then go here and move around? We all know those CAPTCHA things. AIs are actually better at solving CAPTCHAs than humans at this point. I can't wait for them to go away because I'm tired of identifying the bicycle. This concept of generative adversarial networks. So this is basically spinning up AI agents that are both attackers and defenders and watching how they attack each other. Weaponization of AI frameworks. There's a great quote from that book, Steel Beach, that I talked about earlier, which is, any genius can create a lock. Somebody else will figure out how to break that lock, right? And then deeper exploits, and then of course, using machine learning to enable better pen testing. So the key thing when you're talking to your vendors, both on the security side as well as on the business side, you want to make sure, number one, that they're building the AI in and not bolting it on. We see this continually. People are overlaying AI on top instead of using it and building from the ground up. When we deployed a lot of the AI capabilities that we have, we literally ripped the tool down to its bare bones, figured out where AI was going to be helpful, and then we rebuilt from the bottom up so that it was not slap on. But what AI can help you do is accelerate analysis so you can gather data, you can process and connect it much, much more quickly. You can find the real issues faster. AI is great at getting rid of background noise. And we want to automate manual tasks. We hear a lot about AI putting people out of jobs, and I think some of that's going to happen, but it's really the stuff that's very automated. And frankly, automation by people tends not to be super accurate because people get data blind. So some last questions for all of you folks to think about, and then we have about 10 minutes left to take Q&A from the audience. First question, when you talk about third-party cyber risk management and business alignment, who owns it? Who owns the system? Who owns the process? Who owns the data? Who cares about it, right? If there are alternatives or if they don't care about the data, but they only care about operations, we want to know that. How bad would it be if something happened? How bad would it be if a vendor went under? You know what? We wouldn't really care because we have 6 other vendors that do the same thing. Or that would be a huge problem because it's a single point of failure. And I'll tell you a very, very quick story. A friend of mine was the chief security officer for a manufacturing company, and they did a lot of manufacturing for federal governments all around the world. Well, they had a particular vendor that manufactured a screw. That particular screw was a requirement to build a module which went into a guidance system, which was used by military and commercial organizations all over the world. They realized that that vendor was very good at making a screw, but they were very bad at protecting their operations. So the CSO, and it was a single source, nobody else made the screw. The chief security officer went to the board and said, I need $5 million. I want to fill a warehouse filled with screws. And the board said, well, why would we want to do that? And my friend explained to the board, well, if the screw doesn't show up, we have to shut down this whole line. We make $3 billion manufacturing that product. So they gave the CSO $5 million, filled a warehouse full of screws, and guess what happened 3 weeks later? That vendor got hit with ransomware. They shut down for 2 weeks, but my friend's company didn't shut down production for 1 second. Why? Because they saw the risk and they were able to get ahead of the curve. And then finally, who gets blamed? And this is an unfortunate question, but this comes back to the accountability piece. We need to understand who is ultimately accountable for the risk coming to fruition. So thank you very much for your time. I know everybody's coming in from many, many different places. So let me actually here. So here's my contact information. Please connect to me on LinkedIn. I post a bunch of stuff. Some of it is interesting. Some of it is just plain silly. I do a lot of blog writing. And the other thing too, and I have to update this slide, we actually just launched a new podcast not too long ago. It is called Third Party. It is me, our chief security officer, and our head of research just talking about all stuff. It is not a commercial. We actually don't talk about our company at all. It is really just, you get to, the conversations we're having on Third Party are essentially the same conversations we have all the time. We just roll the camera and a microphone. Okay, all right, so let me stop sharing. All right, so we have some questions here. Okay. So great question from John M. How can we assess the quality and security of a vendor's AI model training data? So this is a very, very complicated, simple, short but very complicated question. The first thing you want to do is you want to ensure that they are not using your data to train. Right? Their models should come to the table pre-trained. And that is the first question. I think that the second one is you want to make sure at least that they're building on models that are well understood, that are coming from larger organizations. One of the examples was DeepSeek, which is the Chinese competitor. They built a really cool model, but are you comfortable if one of your vendors is using them? I don't know that it is, because we know that there's a history in that region, in that country, of the technology, the data being shared. So you want to be able to understand that, and you also want to make sure that they have some kind of AI framework. We actually have a model called GA3 that we've integrated into our platform. It's freely available, and just reach out to me and I'll be happy to send it to you. But we took a bunch of different models out there and started asking questions and integrated that. The second part of that is you should start thinking about what kind of information you want to learn from your questionnaires and from your vendor engagement. Are you using AI? What models are you using? Where are you training your data? Let's see your ethics. What happens when we don't want to do business with you anymore? So starting to look at that. Next question from Jana. How can organizations detect if a third party is using AI tools that have not been disclosed? That is a great question. There are tons of discovery tools out there. There are MCP discovery tools that are out there that see all of the communication pathways. The good news is you can actually see those pathways using things like NetFlow data, which we actually have in our platform. So being able to understand, and I think a lot of it is really starting to build this stuff into contracts. Contracts won't stop things from happening, but they do hold people accountable at the end. So great question there. So Amy Lee, what specific due diligence questions should we now include in vendor assessments regarding AI? So I think a couple of the questions are more business side, right? So three questions I always tell people to ask. What do you do now that you couldn't do before? What do you do better? And what do you do that your competitors can't do using AI, right? So those are kind of from a functional perspective. There's a gentleman that I'll point you to. His name is Chris Roberts. He's a longtime colleague, really, really smart guy. About 6 months ago, so you might have to dig a little bit. And if anyone can't find it, ping me and I'll find it for you. He actually published about 25 questions over 3 days that you should be asking your AI vendors. Again, as I said in my intro slide, I know enough about AI to be dangerous. So I would pick a framework. There are tons of them out there. You can look at the GA3 that we have. Cloud Security Alliance actually just put one out. Shared Assessments actually partnered with us. So there are a lot of different frameworks out there. I would just pick one of them at this point now and just start to ask questions. Okay, and then John M. with another question. If an organization is just starting to address AI within third-party risk management, first priority is discovery, as always. You got to know what you got or don't got. So starting to ask them questions, are you deploying AI? What platforms are you using? What controls do you have in place? What is your AI governance look like? And I'll share, I did an event for MIT Sloan Business School just about 2 years ago. So I was on stage with a partner from McKinsey and the CIO from Home Depot, and we had a great conversation. And then I kind of paused and I went to the audience. So there were 100 CIOs in the room. I said, how many of you have AI governance or policy in place? And about 10 hands went up, and you say, well, that's terrible. So I was talking to a former colleague of mine a couple months ago, and I said, I bet it's probably 50% now. And he said, no. He said, it's 90%. He said, but if you ask the follow-up question, which is, are you enforcing the governance policy that you put in place? You're back down at 10%. So we're getting there. People are at least starting to ask questions. But I think it's still very, very nascent. And I actually spoke with one of my former Gartner colleagues yesterday, and she said there are way more questions than answers right now. So I would pick one of the frameworks and at least start to take a look at it and kind of go from there. It's going to evolve over time. And what's interesting is we're starting to see some of the AIs that are actually being asked to create their own governance. So they're asking to be governed themselves. So we then run into a sort of wolf watching the hen house kind of thing. So I think it's it's definitely a challenge here. So let me so here's a link to GA3. So feel free to take a look at that. And again, we don't charge for it. So okay. All right, so we have a couple minutes left. Any final questions? Some great questions from the groups. I always appreciate that. No? Okay. So again, feel free to connect to me on LinkedIn. I am the only Jeffrey Wheatman out there. And I want to thank Noran and the team for inviting me. This is a great way for me to start my day. I'm in the East US, so it's just about 10 a.m. So I have a cup of coffee. I get to talk to all you folks out there, and then I get to go about my day. So again, thank you so much. I appreciate all of you. If you have any questions, please connect to me on LinkedIn. I am an open networker. As long as you promise not to try to sell me something 5 minutes after I connect to you, I take all. So again, thank you very much. And I have much love and respect for what all of you are doing out there. So thank you very much.